Hare Hare Krishna. Welcome to the Dublin Sunday program, which is being brought to you from Dublin, not from the temple, unfortunately, because we're still under the COVID restrictions. I just need to get a clock there just to see what time it is. But, so we'll be giving a talk today on Bhagavad Gita. Thank you, and hope you enjoy it and hope you will participate. I have my book here. Actually, I just need to get the Bhagavad Gita if I can, please. Thanks. I actually have it here. I'm going to speak from the 5th chapter. Let me see. Yeah. And which is action in Krishna consciousness, because we all need to have action in Krishna consciousness. Thank you. And I'm not going to do the whole chapter, but I'm just going to take a little few verses as we go along. It's a very one of the real power chapters, because, you know, first of all, Krishna asks Arjuna, you know, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to sit down and meditate, or do you want me to engage in warfare? So what is it? Tell me. So Krishna then begins to explain that, you know, that one who applies himself to one of these paths actually achieves the result of both. But he basically says that that action in Krishna consciousness means acting to please Krishna. So because you know, Arjuna's task is the same for all of us, it's very important then to try to understand what it is about, because it is. I really get this point which Tribhuvannath Prabhu used to make, which is that, you know, it's Krishna consciousness is so subtle that you could easily miss it, and there are reasons for this. But first, let me just make some the prayers for Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Saraswati Devi Gaurabhani Pacharani Nirvasheshashaya. Just that was like an invocation to the Bhagavatam, the personification of Krishna, who is the supreme original person, the all-attractive, incarnating in the form of the Bhagavad Gita or the Srimad Bhagavatam, and then also to the people who are responsible for training me in the science, or I was just going to say the unfortunate position of trying to train me in Krishna consciousness, but that was to my spiritual master and my grand spiritual master, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. So I thought I would start off with verse 7. One who works in devotion, who is a pure soul and who controls his mind and senses, is dear to everyone, and everyone is dear to him. Though always working, such a man is never entangled. Um, chapter 5 is very interesting because it really gives us the view of somebody who is actually completely in Krishna consciousness. It's like, it's like, I have to use a footballing example, but if you're trying to teach some kids how to be a top footballer, what you do is you get them to look at the top footballer and say, this is what you should try to copy. So in the same way, we have it in spiritual life. Here in Bhagavad Gita, you have the ideal personality, the pure devotee, and then you go from there. So you might say, why are you telling me this? I'm only starting in Krishna consciousness, which is probably the fact for most of us. But no, Krishna does it. Krishna does it, and Prabhupada explains it, and makes it that we actually get a clear picture of what to focus on and where to focus, and what we need to focus on. And that gets back to what I was saying earlier about Krishna consciousness being so simple that you could miss it, it really boils down to that instead of acting to gratify yourself, you act to gratify Krishna as God. And of course, people might say, well, who is God? I mean, is this some imaginary figure that you're coming up with? And you're just trying to lay the blame on somebody else for all your actions, or some other such hypothesis. But no, what we're actually saying is that this gives you an example of how to become qualified to see God, and how to be qualified to act in such a way that God will want to see you. So it's not the important thing is not for us, for our benefit, so that we can see God, but it actually is the reverse. It's teaching us how to behave in such a way that God will want to reveal himself to us. So it's completely the opposite of the rugged individual stroke logician who is completely dependent on his inverted commas reason, and trying to dictate how things should go. Just an interesting thought occurred to me actually as well, just while we're on that topic. How at the moment we're all being kept in under COVID rules because of the medical situation. And for instance, if I tried to argue, not that I would try to argue this point. I have a respect for the actual regulations and the rules as such, and but if I said, well, actually, we're performing Harinam Sankirtan in town, we're calling on God to help us in this situation, or in every situation, actually, not just in this situation. So I think that's equally as valid a thing as what you're doing with your medical advice and so on. And of course, I would be probably jailed or something like that, or I would be ridiculed, but I was looking actually, because I remember in my days back when I was a kid listening to the Bible about how there would be different plagues which would be sent on people, and people depended on God to relieve them of the plagues. But actually my science is actually equally as valid, if not more valid, because the person who is in charge of every atom is also in charge of this virus, and therefore it is within his power to remove the virus if he so wanted to. It may be that it is the virus is acting under the laws of nature, like the laws of karma, so that these are inextricable laws of God that are going on. But we may ourselves pray to God to intercede, because we want to preach Krishna consciousness. It's becoming difficult, so help us to help more living entities become partial to God, so we may ask in that situation for the benefit of others, not for the benefit of ourselves. So I just thought I'd bring that point up, is that to think that, okay, this is the only law or science that is in operation at the moment, the science where they give you this test and they tell you if you're positive or negative or whatever. Well, I won't get into the validity of these testings or not, but it's not the only science, and it is very one-sided as well. But I know there are different considerations, so I'm not going to go down that, as I say, that rabbit hole. But it's still, the science which I'm declaring, which I'm evidencing, is the science of spirit, and that God is actually ultimately in control of all these things. So it becomes down the difference between a person who's acting to please Krishna's senses and to pleasing, not pleasing your own senses. It becomes as simple as that. So this is a very interesting way in which we view a person in that consciousness. Okay, so now we're viewing the professional footballer who's very successful. This is the professional pure devotee, which we're trying to aim towards. We're trying to become to become pure in our own lives. He is dear. Everyone is dear to him. He is dear to everyone, and everyone is dear to him. So, is that not pretty incredible? That is not a situation which would be very enviable, because no one wants to be except if there is some, difficulties, some mental blockages or whatever. But no one wants to be I don't know. There's a lot of vulgar words I could use that. But doesn't want to be difficult with everybody else. He likes, people like to be dear to others, and others to be dear to them. So that was something which would be quite acceptable, I think, for most people. But there is a way in which this happens. It's not just something that, I'm going to be a nice person, and then suddenly if something happens to you, you're a rascal, you have to be able to control your senses. But how do you do that? How do you remain even-minded and equipoised even when somebody is bawling you out or something, for instance? And this is explained by Prabhupada in the purport. This is why these purports are very powerful, because this is a beautiful section. It's in 5.7. If anyone wants to get up their Bhagavad Gitas. It's in the purport of 5.7. Because one who works in Krishna consciousness is servant to all, and he is dear to everyone. And because everyone is satisfied by his work, he is pure in consciousness. Because he is pure in consciousness, his mind is completely controlled. And because his mind is controlled, his senses are also controlled. Because his mind is always fixed on Krishna, there is no chance of his being deviated from Krishna. Nor is there a chance that he will engage his senses in matters other than the service of Krishna. He does not like to hear anything except topics related to Krishna, and he does not like to eat anything which is not offered to Krishna. And he does not like to go anywhere if Krishna is not involved. Therefore his senses are controlled. A man of controlled senses cannot be offensive to anyone. So isn't that very nice? And that's because he sees Krishna. The reason that he's dear to everyone, everyone is dear to him, is because he sees Krishna in everyone. It's particularly powerful. We'll come upon this a bit later as well, but there's three energies. Like there's the supreme energy, which is God. There's the material energy, which is matter, and there's the marginal energy, which is us. So we are marginal, and we have a tendency to either to stay in the spiritual energy or to fall into the material energy. And unfortunately, folks, this is where we are now. We're in the material energy. We're in these bodies, and we're hopefully listening to this class on Sunday, and we're trying to find out how to go back to the spiritual energy. But this is the function in every living entity. The living entity is there, but also Krishna is there. Krishna is the same and non-different. So wherever there is a living entity, there's also Krishna. So therefore, when somebody who's Krishna conscious sees somebody else, he also sees Krishna in that person as well. So that's why we're universal brothers and sisters. We're not enemies. We're not, I don't want to say we're not friends, but in a sense we aren't. But in the major sense we are. We're very dear because we have the same, essence, with the same substance as everybody else, and we're all part of God. So we're brothers and sisters. We're the marginal energy of God. So in that sense, if one can see that in every living entity, that is the ideal situation. Now here's some other examples of of someone, or the state of mind in which one is in, who is pure. Let's hear it. It says, this is text 8 and 9. A person in divine consciousness, although engaged in seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving about, sleeping, and breathing. So we do all those things, don't we? We breathe. Yeah, we sleep, we move about, we eat, we smell. But all those things. Always knows within himself that he actually does nothing at all. Because while speaking, evacuating, receiving, or opening and closing his eyes, he always knows that only the material senses are engaged with their objects, and that he is aloof from them. Now, trying to work that out, so that when the senses are engaged with their objects, the actual living entity is not doing anything at all. So that is a little bit of a mystery, because we're trying to act to please Krishna, but actually when we're acting, we're not doing anything at all. So how does that work? This is probably subject matter for a Sunday feast class. I'm not absolutely sure, but there is a subject here which we can discuss actually, and which is very interesting. So look, we're talking about those different activities. So the person who's in divine consciousness actually knows that when he's doing these things, he's aloof from them, because he's the soul. He's not acting on the material platform. To get that? So while we're breathing, it's the lungs are in action. While seeing, the eyes are in action. The senses and the sense objects, they're kind of material things are working, but ultimately the soul is different from those. So this is Krishna giving this kind of more, just like more profound knowledge of who we are. And it is vital because most people will be not so clear about who we actually are. That is the situation in the material world, because it's just it's not so easy to work out. It's simple, but it's not so easy. So the living entity then finds out who he is, because we are part of God. We're not God, but so therefore our actual position is as the servant of God. So when we're the servant of God, we understand where we are in relation to all of these different things which are going on. Okay, let's give another example. Krishna uses another example in the next verse. He talks about the lotus leaf on water. That while we're in the material world, we're still not in the water. We're there. We're like the lotus leaf who's on the water. He says, one who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering the results unto the Supreme, is unaffected by sinful action, as the lotus leaf is untouched by water. So we don't have so many examples of lotuses that I know in Ireland, but we often see the lilies on the lake. Okay, so we can take that example, that they're usually not touched. They're also on top. So even though you're acting, you're not committing any sinful act. The sinful act means being entangled in the world. Actually, that's the point. Entangled means that when you do something, there's a reaction. Everything. I just move this chair, it moves. I just push it and it moves. I lift up this book, it moves. So no matter what one does, actually there is a resultant action of it. So also even on the subtle plane, that's the fact. Even when you're mentally thinking, you're actually creating a future. And that's an important point about thoughts, that we should also be controlling the mind and controlling the senses, not only physically, but control of the mind as well. So one of the ways in which we can act well in this world, and this is a very, very nice point that Prabhupada makes in the purport, is that you should understand that everything belongs to Krishna. Nothing belongs to us. It all belongs to Krishna. Our breath, our nostrils, our capillaries in the bloodstream, or our lungs, this is very close to home, our nails, our skin, our speaking, all of this doesn't belong to us. This book, this harmonium, none of these things belong to me. Although if somebody tried to take something, hey, that's mine, we have that kind of a sense over, but ultimately nothing belongs to us. And when we're gone, this thing about Christopher Columbus discovered America, but actually America was there long before Christopher Columbus came. and it was there long after Christopher Columbus left as well. So we don't actually own any of these things. And here's another mood of a pure devotee. He acts only for the purpose of purification. It says here, the yogis abandoning attachment act with body, mind, intelligence, and even with the senses, only for the purpose of purification. So this is quite interesting, because this is where we get into the mood of being dovetailing everything in the service of Krishna. Now we understand we have some control over our mind and senses. We have some control, like we will something. I can put, okay, Manu, move your hand. Okay, I move my hand. So I've got some power over that there. Ultimately, I couldn't move it unless Krishna, the Super Soul, sanctions it. He sanctions even the thought, first of all. He allows me to have that thought about to explain this to you. This is very subtle but very powerful. So therefore he allows me to move my hand. So it's not that I can do it independently. I depend on Krishna as well, even to do that thing. But it says here that there is we don't act with false ego. And this is very important, because in the material world we act with false ego by doing everything for our senses. That's what it means. It means acting so that we can enjoy our senses. In particular in the West, there is a major mood of trying to be as comfortable as we can. I mean, I know electric toothbrushes are better than normal toothbrushes, but ultimately they're not absolutely necessary. And I know that we have all types of heating there, but ultimately we just need to stay warm. I know that there is 300 different types of cheese in Tesco's, or varieties of yogurt, but still just simple yogurt would also do. Or you can have 400 different types of cars, even a car, but you know what I'm saying? It's the senses become attached to the sense objects, and then we identify with them, and then we think that this is my house, my car, my prestige. This is called the false ego. My garden, my dog, my wife, my children, you know, my country, my family, my ancestors. You know, it's just like Christopher Columbus, like, you know, it's, you know, you're here for a little while and then you're gone again, and whose is it? You know, and who are you and where are you? And these are the laws of karma. So in this life, this particular life, we have to get an understanding that we're not any of these things. And that's how we try to take ourselves away from the false ego platform. And how do we do that? We engage in the service of Krishna. We become dovetailed in the service of Krishna. That's how we get off the false ego platform. Then we get onto the real ego platform, because we're part of Krishna, Sakchidananda Vigraha. That means we're full of knowledge, full of bliss, full of eternity. That is the nature of the soul. That is the nature of God. Except God is conscious in everything. We're conscious in a very limited space. We're Anu, and God is Vibhu. He's conscious in everything. So in that sense, we're not God as we know, but we're a kind of part of God. So we have some of the potencies of God. So the next verse I think is very interesting as well. The steadily devoted soul attains unadulterated peace. Now we do want peace, isn't it? I mean, it's something that's very valuable for us to have, is this peace, this peaceful mind. Because he offers the result of his activities, all activities, to me, where a person who is not in union with the divine, who is greedy for the fruits of his labour, becomes entangled. So that's really what it's about. That if we become greedy for the fruits, then we become entangled in the reactions of getting those fruits. And it's like I never seen that thing about the Brer Rabbit where he got stuck in the some sticky stuff, I don't know what it was. The tar, and then he tried to get out and he got more stuck. Then he got further and further stuck. So that's how that happens when this thing enters, which is called greed, and it is also based on ego, false ego. So. So the reason that I wanted to talk about the pure devotee, because I also wanted to talk about the living entity who is stuck in the material world, because that is pretty much all of us. You know, we're here, I gave a class a few days ago about going to visit somebody in prison. Actually, the person I'm visiting in prison is now about to get out of prison, which is quite good for them. But they even while in prison, they were doing very well actually spiritually. And but you know, the doors close behind you, boom, 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 one big door after another, and then eventually you get to see the person in this little room or whatever, and it's pretty terrifying actually in a certain way, you know. But this is what we get when we become entangled, and therefore we cannot actually it's like a prison. That's anybody who's in the material world. It is like a prison, like the rabbit in the tower, you know, and we're all in that situation, but we're trying to actually extricate ourselves from that, and the process by which we can extricate ourselves is called Krishna consciousness, by understanding who we are in this situation and how we actually are not ultimately in the situation. This situation is, although it's real, it's temporary, and it is, and therefore it can be. We can disentangle ourselves from that situation. So we have to stop being in anxiety for the result of our action. That's the first thing. We have to stop having profit calculation for sense gratification. A profit calculation for sense gratification. That's how Prabhupada puts it. We're looking to get something out of everything that we do. We're looking for something for ourselves. It's for me, it is a very ugly thing. I spot it in myself regularly, and I have to say, unfortunately, I do spot it in others as well. People say that what I'm spotting in others is what is in myself, but at the same time, this is the world, and we also have to call a spade sometimes, or at least to recognize where the disease lies. And when people are motivated for something for themselves, which of course they don't know which self it is ultimately, they think it's for their temporary situation here, it becomes very ugly, and people are prepared to do absolutely disgusting things to each other so that they can have a better temporary situation here, for either for themselves or for their family or for their religion or for their country. They're prepared to do any amount of heinous activities just so to get some of this profit calculation. So we are trying to act in such a way that we're not doing that, and we're acting for to satisfy God, who owns everything. So there's no profit really there, because God owns everything. He knows everything. So where is the profit? But what we do is we act in this world for Krishna. We act as agents of Krishna, and in that sense, what does Krishna want in this world? He wants people to come back to him in the spiritual world. So we somehow get involved in becoming mercy suppliers or mercy agents of God, and in that way we're not interested even in the results, because the result is up to Krishna, because he's in control anyway. And in that way then the devotee can be filled with peace, and this is the peace which is so exciting, which is so so much what we want. And probably in the next part, Krishna again goes on to describe that when the embodied living being controls his nature and mentally renounces all actions, he resides happily in the city of 9 gates. That's the body, neither working nor causing work to be done. So we don't have this fruited mentality, and we find that anybody who identifies with the body is, because this is the natural tendency, because we are actually covered in this world. This is our prison suit, so we could identify with it quite easily. But anyone who does, then they suffer, to get back onto that 7.4, 7.5, the verses, it's in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, text number 4 and 5. I'll read the Sanskrit because that's what it is. Boomer apunala vayu kam rakbuddha evacha ahankara itiyan made binner prakriti astida. And apariyam itastfanyam prakritim vidi me param. Jiva Bhuta Mahabhavo Yayadim Daryate Jagat. So I'll read the English of that, is that earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. Altogether these constitute my separated material energies. So we're in the body, earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And in the subtle elements is mind, intelligence, and false ego. That's the mind. So we're covered by these 8 different elements. But who is covered? Then Krishna says, besides these, O mighty Arjuna, there is another superior energy of mind which comprises of the living entities who are exploiting the resources of this material inferior nature. So that's us. As long as we're in this body, it appears that we're master, but actually we're not the master. So we're in this body, and it appears that we're in control of things, but we're not. So what is happening? We're in a heaving ocean, and the ocean is the modes of material nature, and it's pushing us this way, that way, this way, that way, this way. We have a tiny little ability to desire, but at the minute the desire comes, we're heaved this way and we're heaved that way. So we're not in control. We may even think momentarily we're in control. While we're being dashed one direction, we might kind of move the water to one way, but there's no control in that. We're heaving in the three modes of material nature. And Krishna explains this, that the embodied spirit, master of the city of his body, does not create activities, and nor does he induce people to act, nor does he create the fruits of action. All this is enacted by the modes of material nature. So then Krishna goes on to explain that that because, like as we explained earlier, we're not vibhu, we're not all knowledgeable, we're anu, we're tiny. Part of our nature is we have the tendency to be influenced by ignorance. Like the supreme vibhu, Krishna, Almighty, he doesn't. That's just not. He's in control of all of these things. But because we are part of God, we have some of the energies, but we can be influenced by ignorance, and we are. And nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers their real knowledge. So that's what's wrong. There's ignorance covering our knowledge, and therefore we don't really know. We don't know how to act. We don't know what to do unless we get guidance from within, but in the heart, by the supreme knowledge. And when the Supreme deems, when he knows that we're ready for that, then he will make us strong, and will reveal himself to us, and will give us that information on how to act properly. So it's really important in this particular purport. Prabhupada explains that we have a capacity to desire. That is what we have the capacity to. That is what we're made of. Just like Krishna has a desire, so the living entity has desire. His desire is kind of minute. You can desire either matter, trying to enjoy matter, or you can actually serve Krishna. That is the capacity of the desire. But the desire, when he pleases Krishna, he is ultimately completely happy, absolutely happy. And when he doesn't, then he's bewildered in his desires. Did you ever in a situation where you don't know what to do, and you're wondering what's happening, and you're thinking about this, and you're wondering about this, and we're bewildered about what to do. Even before we came to Krishna consciousness, especially before we came to Krishna consciousness, we don't even know what way we should go. We don't even know what's happening. So this is the bewilderment which happens. So we should understand that man proposes. So when we eventually in this bewildered state, we call out to God, please help me. Then God appears. Then God comes. Man proposes and God disposes. Even material activities cannot be achieved without the sanction of God. So that is where we have, and so the Lord helps those who help themselves. That's how Prabhupada puts it. So we need to get that connection with God, so that we can enter into that relationship with God. So he gives us the understanding of which to come to him. And in the next verse, Krishna then explains this. When, however, one is enlightened with the knowledge by which nescience is destroyed, that's the ignorance which is stopping us, when he's enlightened with that, then his knowledge reveals everything, just as the sun lights up everything in the day. So that's where we want to get to. We want to be in that situation. We want to get that knowledge. So we have to know how nescience is destroyed, and we get to understand that by what? By hearing from Krishna and Krishna's pure devotee. The next verse, Prabhupada said, or Krishna says, when one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge are all fixed in the Supreme, then one becomes fully cleansed of misgivings through complete knowledge and thus proceeds straight on the path of liberation. So what's the problem? Everybody out there, do you have a problem? What is the problem? What is the difficulty? Well, I'll tell you what the difficulty is. The difficulty is, it says that when one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge are fixed on the Supreme. That's the problem. Because our faith might be in our football team, or in our famous psychologist, or writer, or philosopher. Our faith may be in our job, so that we'll get money. Our faith may be in the government, or in the scientists, or we might say, oh, I'm a religionist. What about Darwin's theory? Oh yes, I remember when I went to school, we were Christian brothers, and of course, Adam and Eve was a fairy tale, but Darwin's theory was reality. You cannot have that kind of dissection. Either you believe in God or you don't, and therefore you believe in what He's explaining to you. And God is that belief isn't just some sort of irrational activity. It's not. It's something which you experience because you have a taste from having having putting faith in God. God reciprocates. You cannot just go only. Oh, I believe. No, there has to be. You have to experience. There has to be a reciprocation there. There has to be there. You have to get the experience of something. So that's just faith. Now you refuge. I can say I have my refuge in God, but maybe I have refuge in my stomach, in my tongue, and my going down to Tesco's and buying whatever, buying the 350 varieties of yogurt. That might be my refuge. But I might say I'm a believer in God, but I might believe in my tongue. It's easy to say, but it's not as easy to do. Your mind, again, sometimes when I'm chanting in the morning, and my mind is going into some activity, some conversation that I had the day before. I might say, yes, I believe in the holy name, I'm a servant of the holy name, but when you're sitting down to chant for your many hours you chant or minutes you chant, are you actually thinking that God is there? That is the question that we have to ask him. If the answer to that is no, which if we're honest, most of us will have that answer, then we'll understand that's why we're not completely cleansed of our misgivings, and that's also why we don't have complete knowledge, and that's also why we cannot get rid of the ignorance, and it's also why we can't proceed on the path of straight back to Godhead. But also there's other problems as well. Maybe from our upbringing we have some sanskars, can you imagine? We might have some sanskars where we were mistreated, badly treated. The more we go on in the world, the more we hear about how people have this post-traumatic stress from things which happened to them at a certain time of their life, and it is something that they can't get rid of. There may be even things that they can't remember. There may be things from different lifetimes which are there. So these are the difficulties why we cannot fully, completely surrender to Krishna. Or we may just have a real, just a taste just for material things. We may be envious, completely envious of God. We may be envious of everybody else, but there's so many things which could be there which would prevent us from taking refuge, or like as I said, I'm explaining what the pure devotee is, but it's not so easy for us to suddenly get on that platform. So, but the according to our scriptures, according to the spiritual master, the way in which we can actually remove those things forever, completely, is through the chanting of the holy names of God. Because from all the Shastra, from all the devotees, the holy name has descended in this age of Kali to give relief to people in this age. And the way that we take shelter in the holy name is it's the actually only thing that we can do. It's quite amazing. For all our intellectualism, of course, we do need to intellectually study and be able to argue and to explain our philosophy and explain it to ourselves or explain it to others. But ultimately, we need to take shelter of the holy name. And when we're talking about the living entity being completely fixed, we have this idea of some yogi meditating on way up in the Himalayas. But that's not necessarily what we're talking about here. We're also talking about as the Madhyamadikari, he goes and he preaches to others. He's always thinking about how to act in Krishna's service or in the service of the spiritual master. And I think because we had Tribhuvan's birthday appearance yesterday, if we look at any of the tapes that we were looking at yesterday, it was nicely kindly put on Govinda Mellows of Tribhuvan, we see how absorbed he is in the holy name, and it's got some taste of the holy name. Have a look at Tribhuvan after Prabhu, and you'll get a real understanding of where he is, what he's doing when he's chanting, how absorbed he is, how completely sold out he is to the holy name, and how he ran across the world, literally speaking, ran across the world just to try to give the holy name to others. And so that is the kind of mood that we have to get in. That is like the example that we have to develop a very strong dependence on the holy name, because that is actually what our salvation is. We have our attempts every week, and it's really nice to see so many people coming out on Harinam. It's okay, it's only 2 hours a week, but still it's a valuable 2 hours if you make it more do, but still 2 hours is good if you can do it. And more people are coming because they're obviously getting some taste. They're getting some taste of doing this. There's maybe less people even around at the moment because of the COVID, but the devotees are there enthusiastically chanting, and it's because they're getting some taste from this chanting. And that's the holy name that's coming, because we're invoking the Supreme to come, and it's the holy name descends. Krishna is there, he's not different. Krishna, Radha, the whole spiritual world is there. And hear more, then you'll know what spiritual world is descending. You'll actually get to recognize the living, who is there. You recognize their activities. You recognize what the mode of activity is there, what the culture is there. So we're starting to develop that culture by the more that we chant Hare Krishna, and the more that we hear and read Bhagavad Gita. So the rest of the chapter really is very interesting, because it says the next verse, Vidya Vinaya Sampane Brahmani Gavihasini Shuni Cheva Svapakacha Pandita Samadarshahan. The humble sage, by virtue of true knowledge, sees with equal vision a learned and gentle Brahman, a cow, an elephant, a dog, or a dog eater. So we don't make any distinction. We see Krishna everywhere. This is the view of eternity, the view, and it's called equanimity. Those whose minds are established in sameness and equanimity have already conquered the conditions of birth and death. Therefore they are flawless like Brahman, and thus they are already situated in Brahman. So the more devotees get into that kind of a mood and get into that situation, the more that we will actually be able to help people in this world, because people really don't really know what this world is about, and they misidentify it with their particular where they are, who they are. And if a devotee actually gets that understanding of who they are and who we are, then we can also be of benefit to others. We can give that kind of that shelter, that peace, that harmony to others. We can say, listen, brother, we're all in this together. We're eternal souls. We're trying to get back out of this material world. We just have to do a few things. Let's do it together. Come and help. We need as much help as we can get. So this is the mood that we're involved in. We're not trying to grab something from that person or utilize that person, or I want that for my power or whatever it is. Or I want to control that person. I want to be the person who's controlling everybody else. Immediately become God again, So it's not required. It's completely not what we need. A person who neither rejoices upon achieving something pleasant nor laments upon achieving something unpleasant, who is self-intelligent, who is unbewildered, and who knows the science of God, is already situated in transcendence. So these are the places we want to get. And again, this happiness and this stress is highlighted again by Krishna, because remember, this is what we're doing here. We're explaining what Krishna is explaining, what this particular persons are like, so that we can actually try to aspire to. So such a liberated person is not attracted to material sense pleasure, but is always in trance, enjoying the pleasure within. In this way, the self-realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, for he concentrates on the Supreme. So this is what we're given. This is the whole goal of the Krishna consciousness movement. We stop someone in the street. Excuse me, would you like unlimited happiness? Well, here it is. It might take a little while to get to, but this is how you do it. That's all we're doing. It's not ours. We're not giving anything ourselves. We're just passing on the message. We have to imbibe the message ourselves, and then we can give it to others. So that's the state in which we want to live. And then again, Krishna, just in case we're under any misconception, Krishna again points out what the problems are. And it's a famous verse, and I've often given classes just on this verse alone. Yehi samsparsha jaboga dukayonaya evate ajantavanta kampeyana teshu ramate buddha. And I probably feel that maybe I was sometimes giving it out of context, because sometimes the person who gives class sometimes takes pleasure in hammering, home the point that we shouldn't just be sense enjoyers, and there's a big hammer, and he wants to see if anybody's moving, and flinches. That's you, and not realizing though that there's the better way to achieve that is to explain that there is a higher taste, and now we need both. We need I would say restriction, or at least control of this mind, control of the senses. I probably err on the other side, that we need to get more taste, vidya vinaya sampane, rasavarjam rasopase param drishvan. I kind of err on that side, but that sometimes to a fault, whereas also the other side is very much there. And Prabhupada also emphasized, Prabhupada's such a balance. Our good friend from Bhuvanapur was such a balance as well. You probably would, a lot of the time we would quote this verse, and he quotes it again in this purport of this verse. Now the verse says, an intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery which are due to contact with the material senses. O son of Kunti, such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and the wise man does not delight in them. So that every person who gives a talk should realize that is meant for the speaker himself, and not for everybody else that he can use a hammer to. But Prabhupada says he quotes in the 551 Srimad Bhagavatam famous verse, Lord Rishabhadev instructing his 100 sons, and it's a beautiful Sanskrit to it as well. Nayam deho bhajam nirloke kastan kaman arhate vidbujam nitye tapo divyam putraka yena satvam sudya jasmad brahma sokyam tvanantam. And Prabhupada nicely gives the translation. My dear sons, there is no reason to labour very hard for sense pleasure while in the human form of life. Such pleasures are available to the stool eaters. That's the hogs. Rather, you should undergo penance in this life, by which your existence will be purified, and as a result, you will be able to enjoy unlimited transcendental bliss. So that's the choice. You can have the choice of the stool eater, the hog. You can imagine a hog.
Oh.
On the way to Innisrat, Tim used to have these two guys, and the minute you slow down the van going by, it's they did pile down to the fence. Very nice characters as well. But they wanted something. They wanted to take whatever you got. So that is the unfortunate position of the greedy living entity. But we need to also have this divine austerity. We should undergo penances, especially in, unfortunately, my age, 50 onwards. I won't say how onwards, but you actually, this is the time for vanaprast and then ultimately sannyas, in which you perform austerities. Also brahmachari, brahmachari is there, but then the grihastha is a little different because he has to engage the senses in earning a living and whatnot. But there's a time when we should control the senses, and the tongue is the most voracious and difficult to control. It's not that suddenly the tongue stops, but when supposedly true knowledge understands how powerful the tongue is, and therefore one tries to restrain it and use it in Krishna's service by speaking about Krishna and taking prasadam. So anyway, this is how we deal with it. But then Krishna now talks about as well. I'm aware of the time, we're coming close to the end here. Before giving up this present body, if one is able to tolerate the urges of the material senses, and here's the other one, and check the force of desire and anger, he is well situated and is happy in this world. So that is the real, that's a real, litmus test. How are you able to control your anger? That person who cut in front of you on the motorway yesterday, did you avoid any expletives when they did so? Did you actually, when you didn't get your prasadam, when the person in the restaurant was to bring it to you, did you get angry? There's simple ways to find out how we're getting on, but this is really powerful. That Prabhupada or Krishna puts this at this point. The material desires, when they're unsatiated, we have to try strenuously to control anger. That's Prabhupada. I didn't say it. Prabhupada is saying it in here. Tolerate the urges of the senses and check the force of desire and anger. Does that mean that we become what is this? It's repression? No, it's not. It's sublimation, actually. We sublimate these things. But this is what Krishna is explaining to us. So we should be conscious. We have to work. We have to fight the glorious fight within. That fight has to go on there, and that we're not allowing our senses away with things. But we have to sometimes. The mind is very tricky. Maya is very tricky. So we have to be able to control the mind as well. And it says there, one whose happiness is within, who is active and rejoices within, whose aim is inward, is actually the perfect mystic, and he is liberated in the Supreme, and ultimately he attains the Supreme. So we have to be very active in Krishna consciousness. And those who are beyond the dualities that arise from doubt, whose minds are engaged with it and who are always busy working for the welfare of all living beings. This is such an important point. This is what we're meant to do, because this is what this material world is set up for the living beings to do. This is what Krishna has got us. This is why we're here, and we have suddenly have realized that. So now we have to try to fulfill Krishna's activity here. We have to act as agents of Krishna to try to help others, and in that way we will become free from all sins, and we'll achieve liberation in the Supreme. So we have to be, in verse 26, Krishna again says, we have to be free from anger and all material desires, self-realized, self-disciplined, and constantly endeavoring for perfection. Not we just sit around, on our whatever platform we're on, and think that we can just, take it easy. No, we're constantly endeavoring for perfection, and that way we're assured of liberation of the Supreme in the very near future. So again, Krishna again is 26 and 27 and 28. We become free from desire, fear, and anger, and then finally, Prabhupada then says that then we're qualified to feel the presence of the Lord in every sphere of one's activity. So that's what makes us qualified to feel the presence of the Lord in every sphere of our activity. So, it's not as if you can just say it and then you're there. No, I went through that whole chapter just so that we can understand that there is a lot of activity, a lot of endeavour that we must perform in order to become qualified. But the stakes are amazing. The results are incredible. You know, the spiritual world is there, is beckoning. It is actually there, and Krishna is there, willing us on to leave this ridiculous place where we're, you know, the two lower, the marginal and the material energy are stuck. We have to get the marginal into with the superior energy, and then we can actually attain the supreme. And whoever is very, very learned will be able to quote for me the last verse of this chapter, because we've got through it all. Thank you very much, whoever was there for it and said, yes, Shani, what is it?
There was a verse I was thinking of. I don't know if it's the verse you're referring to. It's like one is able to control the forces of anger, the tongue, belly, and genitals. One's qualified to make disciples all over the world.
That's right.
That's not the one though.
No, that's in the nectar of instruction.
Yeah, but it's very similar.
Very similar, yes, for what's been described here. Yeah.
Except it takes it even further. Instead of just saying you're qualified to see Krishna, so they
qualified to make disciples all over. Yeah, that's Rupa Goswami. That's Rupa Goswami saying, Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapadanim Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapatantikam. That's Rupa Goswami gives us this incredible insight, especially for now, how Bhaja Vegam Anasakroda Vedam, Jiva Vedam Udra Pasta Vegam, Etam Vegam, Krishna Hetadira, Sarva Napimam Patifim Sashasat, I think that's what it is. And that's actually what is the whole basis of the Krishna consciousness movement. But this last verse actually is the one that Prabhupada said was the peace formula, where we actually can really understand.
Oh, so Krishna is
Krishna's
the proprietor of everything,
yes, proprietor,
friend of everyone,
friend,
and everything belongs
enjoyer.
to enjoyer.
Yeah,
okay. So
proprietor, friend, and enjoyer. Bhaktaram Yakatapasham, Sarva Loka Maheshwaram, Suridam Sarva Bhutaram, Gatramam Shantamrichati. A person in full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the supreme lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material miseries. That's a person in full consciousness of Krishna. But anyway, I love that part, that they're qualified to feel the presence of the Lord in every sphere of one's activity. It's like a real, it's an absolute nugget coming from Srila Prabhupada, like a gem, a totally realized, it's realized knowledge. Just by giving us that, we become, it brings us up to a higher level of consciousness. You know, just knowing that Prabhupada actually brings us up. It's like that's the spiritual master gives us that step, or it actually elevates us in Krishna consciousness just by this power of his Shakti, and then we just go out and chant Hare Krishna then on that basis, and Prabhupada is there with us, just chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and the more we do it, the better it is, and the better it becomes. And any other, anything else? Okay, I'd just like to thank everybody for coming today, or for being participating today in the Sunday program. And so we're going to bring you to level 5 next week, or 4, or 3. In other words, I'm just saying that because unfortunately we won't be able to have any physical Sunday classes for the near futures from what I can see, but we will have still meeting in O'Connell Street on Saturday between 3 and 5, if anybody can make it, get through all the Garda checkpoints and chant Hare Krishna, and maybe we can even have 2 Harinam parties, giving out lots of
How
books.
would that work?
One goes to
Simultaneously?
Grafton Street, yeah, and one
parts.
stays in O'Connell Street, and we give out books, and tons of Bhagavad Gitas, of which we have been reading today. Okay, Shani, would you be able to? Thank you very much. Sankirtan Yogi Ki.